السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah. In our revival circle, we are looking at the book of Zakat from the Ihya of Imam Ghazali. And in the revival circle, we look at an overview of the key lessons of each of the books of the Ihya. And we are not looking at the details of the fiqh related to each of the chapters, but given the importance of zakat and given that so often people are confused about zakat, we will give some framework related to the rulings. So today we're going to look at how to give, but this is not a substitute for actually studying the fiqh of zakat, right? So that's something to keep in mind. بإذن ta'ala. And the previous lesson, we started by looking at two things: the importance of zakat and some of the inward duties. Today we're going to look at how to give zakat. And then the fourth investigation, which will be next class, is looking at the duties of the giver, like how you choose whom to give to, etc. But also the one who receives charity, right? And this, the one who receives charity has a right to receive charity, but at the same time they have the responsibility to approach this kind of financial assistance in a dignified manner and to strive to go towards being self-sufficient, right? Which is why there's a prohibition in Islam of begging if one is not genuinely in need, right? And we'll look at some of that in the next class, because that's that's a very important topic. So we looked in the previous class at some of the inward duties of zakat, right? And these relate to giving with intention, giving with awareness of why you are giving, right? That you owe a duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because Allah has commanded it. You give it out of gratitude. You give out of a sense of opportunity that this will be a means for me to purify my wealth, to purify my character from stinginess and the like, but also to express my care and concern for those poor and needy, right? Because Allah has given us this responsibility. And there are many other wisdoms. So today we're going to look at, briefly, a little bit about some of the guidance on how we give, right? How to give zakat. And if you're following in the translation, you will see that Imam Ghazali talks about the zakat on cattle and other things. If you do have cattle, learn once how you calculate the zakat on those. Because if you're a farmer and you have cattle, there's zakat due on it. And the calculation differs from just giving 2.5%. Why? Because that's how the Prophet ﷺ made it, right? And there's a wisdom in that. And they explain that is done in this way because it's not that one of the simple reasons is because you can't just give 2.5% of your flock, right? If you have 10 sheep, what's 2.5% of 10 sheep? No, 10 sheep, 2.5%, yeah, is a quarter of a sheep. But if you gave a quarter of the sheep in zakat, the sheep's dead. The rest of the sheep's dead, right? So there's a certain way the calculation is done, right? One, for this practical reason, but also animals come in different sizes, different ages have different values. So how do you give it? There's a framework for it that can be learned, but this is the basic wisdom of it, right? That while $1,000, 2.5% of it's easy to calculate. 25 sheep, 2.5% of it don't add up to even one sheep. That's something we should be grateful for as well. That zakat is ultimately just 2.5%, or its equivalent in other things like cattle and stuff if you have them. So if to know who must give zakat, right? The scholars tell us the zakat is due upon a person who's an adult, right? Who possesses the zakatable minimum. This is called the nisab. Because if you own less than this, you're not considered to have enough to be responsible for zakat. If you still want to give it without feeling that you need to, that's up to you. It will count as charity, and you have the reward of whatever your intention may actually be. And then it becomes due upon you when your Zakat year is complete. And we'll look at the breakdown of each of these. This is called the hawl, the Zakat year. And you deduct from this amount your immediate expenses. Because what you need for your immediate expenses, it's as if you don't have it. Because you have to pay that month's bills, you have to pay that month's rent, food, you have bills coming up, you have debts you have bills coming up. Well, and you also deduct debts that are due, which are debts that are already due upon you or debts that are payable in the upcoming month. Right? Because if you owe, let's say Zubair borrowed $10,000 from his friend Majid, payable in 5 years to get married and to start, to start his own coffee shop or coffee roasting business or whatever. So even though his friend, the friend owes $10,000, but it's payable in 5 years. So how does that affect your ability to give zakat now, right? So this is, but if the 10,000 is already due, you're supposed to have paid it 3 months ago. Then paying the debts that are already due are given precedence. So debts that are due or the upcoming payment of debts that are, for example, in installments. Someone bought a car on installments in a halal manner. Let's say the car's $25,000. Do you deduct all $25,000? No, because you're not paying it all at once. The next payment is whatever, $500. So that's what you deduct. Now, if someone decides not to deduct all of this, so let's say their zakatable amount is $10,000. If they deducted immediate expenses, that month's expenses, which is $4,000, and they deducted their the debts that are due, which are $4,000. They're going to give zakat on 2,000. Right? 10,000 that are all your zakatable assets minus your upcoming expenses minus your debts. But someone says, you know what? The zakat on $2,000 is how much? It's $50. Right? So if I paid zakat on $10,000, it's $250. Correct? Correct? Yeah. On 100 is 2.5. On 1,000, it would be 25. On 10,000, it would be 250. Is that a lot? I mean, it's not a small amount, but it's not going to cripple. You got $10,000. At the end of it, you'll have 9,750. So this is one of the things that zakat isn't taxes, right? This is your way of helping the poor. Now, a lot of people, what they do when they come to zakat, they minimize it. Right? Can I also exclude this? Can I also exclude this? But then, someone poor comes, they give them $500. Why don't you just give your zakat with in a maximal way? Because this is, zakat has many times the reward of charity, of sadaqah. So that's something to consider and keep in mind as well. It was something we'll reiterate. So the first of the criteria, of course, is zakat is due on adults. So zakat is not due upon children. So let's say someone is saving, someone's daughter, for example, they've set aside money for her education center, but they put it in her account. So it's added up. Alhamdulillah. They made, someone decided that some of the profit of their company, they're going to save it up for put some for their spouse, some for their daughter, to give them for whatever reason. Now the daughter is 9 years old. She has now $12,000 in her bank. Until puberty, zakat is not due. Right? Until puberty, zakat is not due. However, zakat is due upon puberty, and a lot of people don't realize the implications of that. Right? That if a child has accumulated wealth, then upon puberty, it is due. Now, it is due from the child's money, but if the child hasn't reached understanding, children can hit puberty, like age of 12, 13, 14. Girls can hit puberty earlier than that, potentially. So a lot of people aren't aware. And of course, there's a separate issue, which is outside the scope here, that a child, once they hit puberty, are considered morally responsible. So they're a young adult. Now, they're not an adult, that, let's say, if, someone's uncle gave a child $100,000, said, this is for your daughter. If your daughter hits puberty, would you give her the $100,000? Because now you're an adult, this is yours? No, you can't. Islamically, you can't. Why? Because most children, once they hit puberty, do they have the maturity to spend the money wisely? No. You can give them a little at a time, because parents still have guardianship over the child's wealth until they hit not just adulthood, but maturity. such that you expect that they'll know what to do with their money. Right? Now, we're not suggesting that children take their parents to court, that you gave me the money too early, I blew it on candy. But it's a responsibility for parents, right? And most parents do realize such responsibility. So, in this, one should just, take note that if one has children, once they hit their teen years, they hit puberty, that zakat would be due. Now, if the parents want to pay the zakat from their own money, on behalf of the child, they can do so. Just like a husband can pay his wife's zakat with her approval, or vice versa, the wife's wealthy. And that actually happened during the time of the Sahaba. Right? So that's the condition of adulthood. But this also applies that, for example, if a couple's married, technically each adult is responsible for their own zakat. One can pay on behalf of the other, but some couples get very stingy when it comes to money things. So the wife says, no, my money is mine, but you have to pay my zakat. At the basis is the families operate through mutual agreement, etc. But legally, the wife's her own economic person. She owes her zakat. Her money is hers, but she has the right to her money, but she has the responsibility, that's owed to her money. But husbands are rewarded for these kinds of things. But the wife cannot demand that from the husband. The husband's tight that month. She says, can you pay my zakat? He says, I don't have the money. She can't hold that against him because it's not due on him. Right? Okay. Then that one must, if one owns the zakatable minimum, and the Prophet ﷺ defined the zakatable minimum in two currencies, in gold and in silver. Right? He defined it ﷺ in gold and he defined it in silver. This is the equivalent. Now, at that time, that measure of gold and silver were the same. But it has happened that through history, the price of silver has plummeted. Right? So there's no real equivalency now between the gold nisab and the silver nisab. The gold nisab is roughly how much? It's well over 4,000 US dollars, right? It fluctuates. The silver nisab is how much? Is a couple $100. But would you say that someone who has a couple $100 is well off? No, right? If they have a family, how long does $200 last you? Yeah, right? Especially if you have some expense coming up, you have to fill your gas tank, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to go do the groceries, right? What's the silver nisab right now? Roughly. Yeah, it's a couple hundred US. And it fluctuates. So that's why the scholars generally say that to treat the nisab as being the nisab of gold, right? That if your zakatable wealth reaches the nisab of gold, is about 88 grams of gold. Some say more, some say less, some say 85.8, but roughly in that range. then zakat is due. Now, you consider there are various categories of zakatable assets. You consider all of them together. So let's say Zubaydah, she's still not married, but she has some gold. Right? So she has, let's say, 50 grams of gold. She also has some silver. She also has some cash. Right? She also started a tea business as a formal business. So she has a lot of inventory of tea. So these things would all be considered together, the various categories of zakatable assets, for the purpose of calculating zakat. So, what are the zakatable assets? Right? You calculate all of them together. So let's say if we were to say that the nisab is $5,000. Someone has the weight value of the gold they have is $2,000. The cash that they have is $2,000, right? But they've also lent out $1,000 to someone. In the Hanafi school, money that you've lent out to others is your money. So you still pay zakat on it. And there's several wisdoms in that. One being, quite simply, that otherwise what would people do? Yeah. When before zakat becomes due, let's say if I was in, like my zakat's due next Monday, so I go to my friend Majid and say, Majid, I lend you $10,000 for a week. So Majid takes, he didn't even need it. He puts the $10,000 on the shelf. When my zakat becomes due, say, I don't have any money. Right? And there's some difference of opinion about this, but this is in the Hanafi school. Even money lent out. Now, investments are not zakatable in themselves. If you earn anything on the investments, zakat is due on, that is considered to be from your money. If you've earned something on the investment, they gave a dividend, for example. So you consider that with your wealth. Now, stocks are a type of investment. Zakat is not due on the stocks themselves. It's due on any returns made on those stocks. Unless you are just buying and selling stocks purely as a trader, then that would take a different ruling. And if you are actively investing or trading in stocks, then you should learn the fiqh of zakat related to it, because there are some nuances and a number of positions. But that doesn't affect everybody. And one of the simple things one can do as well is to find a reliable zakat calculator and just use the zakat calculator. Right? That's also a simple way of doing it. You don't have to break it down fully yourself. And there's a number of such zakat calculators. Seekers has a zakat calculator. The National Zakat Foundation has a reliable zakat calculator. And they differ on certain minor things. Now, if someone has a business, zakat is due on inventory. And they say this is actually very conducive to good trade. Why? Because if you're a smart trader, would you keep a large inventory? No. And that's actually good business. Right? Because if you keep a large inventory, you're not, so as a Muslim trader, you just have to be aware. If you keep a large inventory, you need to pay zakat on it. 2.5% of the market value of that inventory. If you buy something thinking that, I might sell it as well, that's not inventory. Right? That, let's say, you heard about there's this good place that has some perfume. So you bought you bought 2 or 3 bottles of perfume. Say, I might sell one of them. So you didn't use it yet. That's not inventory. That's just your own thing. At some day you chose to sell it. Right? But the inventory for business, zakat is due on it. And again, if you engage in business, you should find out how you calculate and how you pay zakat on it. When your zakat year is due, then you see what your actual inventory, which are the items that you would sell, how much inventory you have, and 2.5% of the market value of that, zakat is due on that. Now, your personal belongings, zakat is not due on. Your clothes, your furniture, your car, even your house. Likewise, for your business, you do not pay zakat on your business supplies. So if we're using the coffee example, if you have a coffee roaster, are you selling your coffee roaster? No. So there's no zakat on that. You set up a whole studio because you started doing a video blog on coffee. You're not selling that equipment. So none of that. It's just on what you'll be selling. And so that's one of the things that. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that zakat can be paid in cash. It also can be paid in kind at the current market value of whatever you give in as zakat in kind. So I felt very bad about it, but the guy really seemed genuine in wanting to assist. So it seems almost unbelievable now, but the years I was in Damascus, I didn't own a computer. Didn't need it. No, none of the students in knowledge had it. This late 90s. When I got to Jordan, initially I didn't have a computer. I was using my friend's computer a little bit. But then I started working with him a little bit and I found, so I got a computer. It stopped and then it started giving some trouble. So I was looking at, maybe I'll buy myself a laptop because I was working at different places. It was getting a bit awkward. So I'd go to this computer store, look around. Then one day, I was just in a mall. We'd go shopping. I just go check it out. I'm thinking, should I get it? Should I not? Still just indecisive. So the owner came, religious guy. And he said, are you a student of knowledge? I said, yeah, I study a little bit. He said, tell me about you. I said, okay. I've noticed you've come here. Do you have a laptop? I said, well, I do have a computer. He said, does it fulfill all your needs? I was awkward. I said, alhamdulillah. He said, no. And he insisted on finding out, etc. Long story short, he said, look, my zakat is due. I have inventory. Right? I have inventory. So I'm giving some of my inventory in kind. So please choose a laptop that fits your needs and take it. I said, no, alhamdulillah. So he insisted. The first one, I didn't even choose the laptop particular. He gave me a really nice laptop. Why? Because he had to pay his zakat. And it was easier to give it. Let's say he had to give $10,000 in zakat, let's say. So he, gave away, let's say you give away 10 laptops at their market value rather than giving actual $10,000 out. One can do that. But of course, it has to be given out to those eligible to receive it. So, and then with stocks, the basis is stocks, zakat is not due on the stocks themselves. Stocks are a type of investment, but on the return on the stocks. Now, it does get tricky. There's one pretty straightforward opinion, which is that zakat is not due on stocks at all, but rather on the earnings from stocks. But the reason it gets tricky is that by owning stocks, you own a sliver of a company. Now let's say you invested in stocks of a small company. So you own 1% of the company. But that company has cash assets, has cash on hand, and other zakat assets. Technically, you own 1% of those cash assets. They have inventory. You own 1% of that inventory. So some of the scholars, and that's the more precautionary opinion, they suggest a way of calculating, and they set benchmarks for this, of calculating what share of your stock portfolio is in zakatable assets. So that percentage of your stock holding you would give in zakat. And that's a precautionary opinion, but it is certainly more complicated. It is certainly more complicated. And you can see details related to that on Seekers. But some people they complicate their lives. Why? Because they just give zakat on 2.5% of all their investments. And that's overkill. Right? And in many economies, they invest, but especially in some mature economies, like returns in many places, like Canada, etc., there on many types of investments, you might not be making that many returns. Because like Canada is a very stable economy compared to other economies. So returns, there's much less risk in investments here, but also we don't have spectacular kinds of returns in Canada, like in many other countries where there's a lot more financial risk. Anyways, so those are things that if you have a business, you have investments, figure that out once, or just use a zakat calculator. But typically, the way knowledge works is you only need to figure things out once with somebody who knows. Because once you figure it out, like how to do it once, the next year is what you pay zakat on completely different normally? No, it's pretty much the same. Or if a few things changed, then you just have first time you needed an hour with a scholar or someone who knows how to calculate zakat properly to clarify. You had 10 questions. Second year, you may have 2 or 3 questions. Third year, you may have a question or not. A few years from now, you won't have any questions. You gotten used to it. But this zakat's an important duty, and we take it. We try to do it properly. Then the zakat year. The first time you own the zakatable minimum, your zakat year starts. So let's say that Abdul Majid. So Brother Majid has a friend called Abdul Majid. he remembers when he first had a nisab, because his family had no money. Well, they had a little bit of money stored up for him, but Abdul Majid's father had a heart attack when Abdul Majid was 13. Abdul Majid had $3,000, less than the nisab. So he pitched in. He said, Mom, I want to pitch in to pay for the heart surgery. They're in a country where they don't have comprehensive health insurance, etc. So he pitched it. Okay, so he has no money. At the age of 14, he started a business, buying and selling imported wireless headphones. And he made a lot of money on it because his uncle, Majid, overseas was supplying him with cheap earphones, and he was selling them in the local market at a good markup. Anyway, so he made money. So he remembers when he hit the nisab first time he had the zakatable minimum. So that is when your zakat year begins. And then the zakat year ends a year later, right? So it begins when you first own the zakatable minimum. 1 year later is when your zakat is due. And then it's a spot concept. A spot concept meaning that what do you pay zakat on? What you own on your zakat date. So let's say Abdul Majid first had a zakatable minimum on a day like today. What's today? But it's the 26th of Dhul Hijjah. So 26th of Dhul Hijjah, he finally hit the nisab. Then technically every year, 26th of Dhul Hijjah, he looks at, okay, today, what do I have in my zakatable assets? That's what I pay zakat on. Now, you can give it in advance. You shouldn't delay it, right? But where you're not fully sure exactly how much you had on the exact zakat date, you make an estimate. Right? Or you round up just a little bit. If you don't know your zakat, when your zakat year actually began, if you can remember, then, without difficulty. Otherwise, you just set a date. Let's say every year on the 1st of Dhul Hijjah, I'll pay my zakat. Goes roughly around there. There's no particular merit in setting Ramadan as your time of giving zakat. If anything, in our times, it's probably better not to set Ramadan as the time of giving your zakat. Why? Because everyone gives zakat in Ramadan. And there's nothing in the sunnah that indicates that zakat is particularly meritorious in Ramadan. Make a note of the time for this, right? So, and why is that important? Because are the poor only in need in Ramadan? No. So there's many Muslim charities that raise 80-90% of their zakat in Ramadan. And you're not supposed to delay paying zakat. But the charity collects the zakat and they space it out because let's say the charity collects it for orphans and widows, let's say. The Detroit Orphan and Widow Fund. Right? Because the poor and needy aren't only needy in Ramadan, they're needy throughout the year. Right? So this is one of the short-sighted things, that you shouldn't delay your zakat till Ramadan. Right? Now you could choose to give it in Ramadan early, but in our times, because things are so skewed, you're probably rewarded more for giving it. Like, give it whenever it's due. Or spread it out over the year. Give some in Ramadan, spread it out. But like right now, for example, zakat is in the beginning, like Ramadan is now starting in March, correct? Late March or whatever. Late March, early April. But so a lot of charities struggle year end, beginning of the year. Why? Because nobody's giving zakat. And they have all these poor people. So a lot of charities, I get asked a lot about this question. That can we hold zakat 8, 9, 10 months? Because people for some charities, and in some places it's not quite so bad, but people barely give zakat at other times in the year. So there's nothing whatsoever that is particularly meritorious about giving zakat, specifically in Ramadan. Now, good deeds are multiplied then. But if you were a surgeon, would you be rewarded for your surgery in Ramadan more than other times of the year? Yes, good deeds are multiplied, correct? But if a sick person comes 2 days before Ramadan and they need surgery, should you say, come back in 2 days and I'll operate on you in Ramadan, because all good deeds are multiplied in Ramadan? And the answer is, of course not. Why? Because you do the good at the right time for doing the good. Correct? Is extra worship in Ramadan of greater reward? Yeah. But let's say you think about, okay, if each year I do 4 rak'ah each night, someone says, okay, I want to do 4 rak'ahs of tahajjud, of night worship. How many rak'ahs is that? In a year? 4 times 365 is 1,460 rak'ahs. So you say, okay, 1,460 rak'ahs divided by 30 nights of Ramadan. Say, is prayer in Ramadan of greater reward? Yeah, many times. But it's okay, why bother doing 4 rak'ahs every night? Why don't I just do 49 rak'ahs? Okay, 50 rak'ahs, because you can't pray 49 rak'ahs of nafil. I'll do 50 rak'ahs. I'll end up doing more. I'll do 50 rak'ahs each night of voluntary prayer in Ramadan. Is it allowed to do 50 rak'ahs each night? Is it allowed? Of course. And nafil is an open door. But would you have greater reward of praying 50 rak'ahs each night in Ramadan or 4 rak'ahs each night throughout the year? Sorry? Yeah, the consistency. So it being Ramadan is just one consideration. Consistency is a consideration. Actions that are consistent are rewarded more. Assisting the one in need when they're in need is of more reward. Right? Imagine if someone's dying on the street and they're bleeding and you're walking to the masjid. You say, I do my good deeds in Ramadan. I'm not going to help you now. Right? It's absurd. Likewise with zakat. Zakat is for those in need. So don't delay your zakat. Right? Don't delay your zakat. And that's why many of the ulama point this out, that it's probably in our time you have probably much greater reward in giving it at other times of the year. Or just simplify, give it when it's due. But even if you're going to set a time for zakat, I would advise without hesitation, set a time outside Ramadan, if you can. And be sure, because the poor are not attended to at other times of the year. Now, what do you deduct? First thing is immediate expenses, which is not necessarily your minimum expenses, but what expenses you have. What in the next month, what are the upcoming expenses that you have? But you can also deduct major expenses that you know are coming up beyond a month, right? Beyond a month. So for example, someone has a small coffee company. So they've been seriously thinking about getting a big coffee roaster because their company is building up. How much is a big coffee roaster? Let's say $30,000, right? Now that's a major expense. You're saving up for that, but you need another 2 months till you have the liquidity to get it. Or they're just, you're getting it customized for the kind of beans that you want to roast. So they're customizing the roaster. It's payable in 2 months' time. But if you pay the zakat on the money that you're saving up, you won't have enough. So you can deduct more than 1 month, but if you can get away with not deducting it, it's better because it's more advantageous to the poor, right? But there are situations where someone may have the money and you can deduct up to 1 year. But you shouldn't do that except in situations that would put you in difficulty. What's an example? A scholarship student receives a lump sum scholarship payment at the beginning of the year. So let's say somebody is paying their zakat their zakat is due this year on August 15th, right? They got their scholarship for the year on August 10th. Their university fees is due October 11th. Let's just say the university doesn't bill you for all the courses till after, because a lot of students drop in and out of courses. Well, let's say that's how they bill. So that's beyond 1 month from when you got your scholarship. But then you also have rent due. And in many countries, people have to pay several months of rent upfront. That's just a bad habit. In many countries, it's even creeping in, even though technically it's not legal in the Greater Toronto Area, but many people, they don't have a good credit rating, whatever. Students, someone's renting their basement out, say, okay, I want, because it's so, the rental market is so competitive that they insist you must pay 4 months of rent up front. Also because students are notorious in being late. So he has all these expenses coming up. If he pays his zakat on August 15th, these other upcoming expenses, and he has enough just for his basic budget for the whole year, then you could deduct these known upcoming expenses as well. But the caution is, the practical caution, just deduct 1 month. Unless it'll put you in major liquidity problems, tighten your belt a little bit if you need to. And Allah has promised increase in wealth. And then you can also deduct your debts. And these are the debts that are either, as we mentioned, that are already due or the upcoming payments of a long-term debt. So someone has a mortgage, for example. You wouldn't deduct $250,000 because then for most people, when are they ever going to pay zakat? So someone's earning a good amount, etc. You just deduct the upcoming payment because that's the one that affects your current liquidity. So that's what you deduct. We have a course on Seekers, an on-demand course on zakat that goes through how you calculate zakat and so on, and that will give you some guidance. And we have many resources and reader on zakat, etc., so you can see there. But some practical guidance. One is plan your giving. Because some people say, my zakat is due, but I don't have the liquidity. What do I do? Right? And a basic guiding principle in life is plan your deen as you plan your dunya. That's the minimum for the believer. Right? O Lord, grant us the good of this life and grant us the good of the next. That's the minimum. Right? That if you had a meeting at work, could you say, sir, unless you had to actually go to work. In these days, you don't always have to go to work, right? Or you had a meeting online. Say, sir, I'm still at the park with my daughter. I'm going to be late for the meeting. Is that acceptable? No. Because you need to plan your worldly affairs. Right? Now, plan your religious affairs. Right? That, okay, my zakat is coming due next month. How am I going to be ready for it? Just like prayer. Someone's driving in winter from Toronto to Quebec City. People plan, what are they going to do in Quebec City? They plan this, they plan that. Are you exempt from prayer when you're traveling? No. Say, but it's cold. Yeah, let's say it's in winter time. Yeah, it's Canada, it is cold. Where are we going to pray? What are we going to do? So plan your deen as you plan your dunya. And practically in any worldly thing you're doing, think, what are the religious implications of this? How does it affect my prayer? The other matters, and think it through. Find out in advance about halal and haram things, food, etc. You go to a country, like I've had so many times, like I have friends I know who know that I grew up in Spain, but I haven't been to Spain. I haven't been back since I left. So it's a totally different world. I left Spain end of 1990. Okay? Say, we're here in Madrid. Any recommendations for halal places? For halal food? Can you trust the halal food in Madrid? So why would, of course I have to be buying, but why would I know? But you planned everything else, and now suddenly you're somewhere, say we're hungry. What do we do? Look for a halal place, but plan these things out. Okay, so plan the giving. It's meritorious to give early, right? Because you'll have a good sense. Typically, most people, year to year, they'll be giving a similar amount. So it's better to give early, and then on the zakat, when the zakat becomes due, you say, okay, my zakat this year was, let's say, $2,000, somebody. Right? So it's better to be in a situation where you gave a bunch of zakat early. So, okay, I've already given 1,500, I only have 500 left to give. You can give zakat in advance. So you end up giving 2,500 zakat. Now you say, I only owed 2,000. So that other 500 would count as zakat for the year after that, if you want. Or you can say, khalas, this was lillahi ta'ala, and next year you can calculate your zakat again. Give early. If you have challenges with liquidity, and many people have issues with that, for example, with business inventory and stuff, if you plan early, give early, etc., this would, take care of that, right? Don't keep so much inventory. Okay? And that which is also better business-wise, right? Rather than take inventory, take things on consignment. Or whatever. But also know that whatever you give for Allah, Allah will grant you increase in it. And it's not ultimately a large amount. The other problem with liquidity is that we live in very material conditions, right? Everything things have been very materialized, right? So a lot of people earn a lot of money, but they spend it all. Someone may have maybe making a six-figure salary annually, like making well over $100,000 annually. But every month, because as people earn more, they pay more monthly for their house, they have bigger bills, they have a bigger car, they have bigger expenses. Before they used to just drink water, now they get fancy this and fancy that and fancy breads, and they go organic and they go this. So the couple is making $15,000 a month, but still, how much do they have end of the month? Barely anything. When zakat becomes due, how much liquidity do they actually have? Sadly, a lot of people don't. And that's not in line with Islamic values fully, unless one has high intentions, because they're different people. But for most people, you should have some savings, right? You should have some savings. The Prophet ﷺ saved a year of provision for his wives when he was able to, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But people's circumstances differ. Many Sahaba didn't have anything. Abu Dhar questioned the Sahaba that how come you guys don't you keep money and don't give it to the poor? They said, well, you are aware of the rulings of zakat, are you not? And he had to admit that yes. So one of the implications of that is, as you earn, we talked about this last class, that as you earn, one of the things to do is just give 2.5% of what you earn as you earn it. Because it's not a lot. Just set it aside, hasten to give it. It'll end up being much more, right? But that a lot of the righteous used to do that. It's not a requirement, it's not an expectation, but it is from the ways of virtue. As you earn, of course, zakat will still be due on other things, but certainly on your earnings, as you earn, put 2.5% aside, give it in charity. If you calculate your zakat and circumstances, whatever, you have ultimately very little zakat due. Can you choose to give more? Yeah. There's no expectation to, but you choose to give more. Right? That's meritorious. But you should never have the expectation that I need to give more. Right? So these are some of the practical guidelines related to giving. And of course, last thing is the intention. Right? The last thing is the intention. Right? Because everything revolves around that intention. That zakat is a way, is an act of devotion and a means of drawing closer to Allah. But zakat is also a way of expressing your concern for those in need. So next class we're going to look at whom to give to and how to give to the one you give to. But also how to receive charity if you are in a situation of difficulty or need. So that's what we wanted to look at today. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Any questions here before we close? Go ahead. Yeah, so if one didn't pay zakat, if you did own the zakat, most paper routes don't make that much money, right? But there are people, they have accumulated wealth. Right? They have accumulated wealth, right? And it's easy. There are some websites, historical nisab amounts, right? Because it wasn't always at this level, but if you did have the nisab back then, and there's some, there's people who have accumulated wealth, their parents set aside money for them, whatever, whichever circumstance, then you would, right? But then you do it like all responsibility is to the extent of ability. Let's say someone didn't pay, or someone wasn't religious for a while. So let's say they said there's 10 years someone didn't pay zakat. Allah does not make a soul responsible for more than it is able. So what do? They pay their zakat gradually. Like they calculate how much is due, and they make the resolve that I'm going to pay this in full. And they see how much am I able to pay without hardship. Right? So they say, okay, they owe 10 years of zakat, so it's $30,000. You don't have to go take a loan and this and that. It's okay. And it's just the power of consistency, right? Let's say they owe $24,000 in back zakat. So it's okay. So in 2 years, if I paid back, 24 payments would be $1,000. Say, now that's too much. Can I do it in 4 years? $500. That's too much. I'll do it in 8 years. Right? So you see what is feasible, and one starts. And then, but one keeps the intention. That relates to the rights of Allah, such as zakat. But also, if someone had a whole bunch of accumulated debt, someone kept borrowing from different members of the family to get their business going. And then all these people, nobody excused them from the debt, but is it better to ask for your debt to be waived or to actually just go and pay it? It's much better to pay it. So then, but you have to do it immediately, because if someone can do it, but if you can't, it's okay, I will pay everybody. So you make that intention, number one. Then and then the best thing is to set a payment schedule with each person you owe, because then they've accepted that payment schedule. And in that kind of situation, if one dies with the resolve to clear one's debts and taking the means to clear one's debts, it's as if one's cleared one's debts. Right? Same thing applies to missed prayers. Let's say someone started praying at the age of 70. So they have, 57 years of missed prayers to make up. How are they going to make it? If you think about it, this uncle now has the opportunity of doing 57 years of worship, which they'll be rewarded for the fard, in their final years of their life. So what do? They resolve, they repent, that lifts the sin. What is owed to Allah remains. So they make a plan. It's okay, I intend to make this. So if you make you repent, you make the resolve to correct, and then you take the means of correcting. Then if someone dies while striving, it's written as if they cleared their dues fully. That's the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alhamdulillah. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.